The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Clarence's house as King Charles sat alone in his private study, staring at the newspaper headlines that had dominated the morning news. Camilla's shocking betrayal rocks the palace screamed across the front page, accompanied by grainy photographs that told a story he never wanted to believe. His hands trembled slightly as he set the paper down, the weight of betrayal settling heavy in his chest. For months, whispers had circulated through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. Staff members exchanged knowing glances. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms, and even his closest advisors seemed to be walking on eggshells around him. Charles had dismissed these signs, attributing them to the usual palace gossip that followed every royal marriage. He had weathered storms before, survived the public scrutiny of his relationship with Camilla through decades of controversy, and believed their bond was unbreakable. The truth, when it finally emerged, came not from the tabloids or palace insiders, but from an unexpected source. His private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, had requested an urgent meeting 3 days earlier. The usually composed man had seemed visibly shaken as he placed a manila folder on Charles's desk. Inside were photographs, phone records, and detailed reports that painted a picture of systematic deception that had been occurring right under the king's nose. Camilla had been conducting a secret correspondence with her ex-husband, Andrew Parker Bowles, that went far beyond the cordial relationship Charles had been led to believe existed between them. The communications revealed intimate conversations, clandestine meetings, and what appeared to be an emotional affair that had been rekindled shortly after Charles's coronation. The irony was not lost on him that history seemed to be repeating itself, but this time, he was the one being betrayed. The evidence showed that Camilla had been meeting Andrew at their old haunts, places that held significance from their earlier relationship. They had been spotted together at country pubs, walking through gardens where they had once courted, and even spending weekends at a cottage in the Cotswolds that Andrew had purchased specifically for these encounters. The photographs showed them holding hands, embracing, and sharing intimate moments that belonged to a marriage, not a friendship. What cut deepest was not just the physical betrayal, but the emotional manipulation that had accompanied it. Camilla had been lying to his face for months, creating elaborate stories about her whereabouts, using royal duties as cover for her secret meetings. She had looked him in the eye and sworn her devotion while simultaneously planning her next rendezvous with another man. The woman he had fought for, sacrificed for, and ultimately married despite enormous public opposition, had been playing him for a fool. Charles remembered the conversation they had shared just 2 weeks prior, when Camilla had expressed concerns about their public image and suggested they might benefit from spending more time together to strengthen their relationship in the eyes of the public. Now he realized this had been nothing more than a smokescreen, designed to throw him off the scent of her duplicity while she continued her affair behind his back. The king's immediate response had been one of disbelief, followed quickly by a rage so pure and consuming that it frightened him. He had always prided himself on his measured reactions, his ability to think through problems rationally and find diplomatic solutions. But this betrayal struck at the very core of who he was, not just as a monarch, but as a man who had endured decades of public humiliation and criticism to be with the woman he loved. As the reality of the situation settled in, Charles found himself thinking about the sacrifices he had made for Camilla throughout their relationship. He had endured the breakdown of his marriage to Diana, weathered the storm of public opinion that painted him as the villain in a fairy tale romance, and fought against the establishment to make Camilla his queen. He had given up relationships with friends and family members who disapproved of their union, defended her against critics who believed she was unworthy of the crown, and restructured his entire life around their partnership. The photographs that hurt most were not the ones showing physical intimacy, but those capturing the easy companionship and genuine laughter between Camilla and Andrew. In these images, she appeared relaxed and happy in a way that Charles realized he had not seen in their own relationship for quite some time. It suggested that her betrayal was not merely physical but emotional, representing a return to a relationship that perhaps had never truly ended. Charles's thoughts turned to the immediate practical implications of this discovery. As king, his personal life was inextricably linked to the institution of the monarchy. Any scandal involving the queen consort would inevitably reflect on the crown itself. potentially damaging the carefully rebuilt reputation of the royal family. The public, who had eventually come to accept Camilla after years of gradual integration into royal life, would be quick to resurrect old criticisms and questions about her suitability for her role. The king also considered the impact on his relationship with his sons, William and Harry, both of whom had gradually accepted Camilla into the family despite their complicated feelings about her role in their parents' marriage. This betrayal would likely vindicate those who had always harbored suspicions about her motivations and loyalty, creating new fractures in relationships that had taken years to heal. As evening approached and the rain continued to fall, Charles made a decision that would change the course of his reign and his life. He would not confront Camilla immediately with the evidence of her betrayal. Instead, he would take time to process this information, to plan his response carefully, and to consider all the implications for both his personal happiness and his royal duties. But one thing was certain: the woman he had loved for decades, the woman he had made queen, was already dead to him in every way that mattered. The king closed the folder containing the evidence of his wife's betrayal and locked it away in his private safe. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult conversations, and painful decisions. But tonight he would mourn the death of a love that had defined his adult life and begin the process of rebuilding his world without the woman who had been at its center for so long. The following morning brought no relief from the storm that had settled over King Charles's world. He had spent the night pacing his private chambers, alternating between fury and heartbreak as he processed the full scope of Camilla's betrayal. As dawn broke over London, he realized that avoiding her indefinitely was impossible. Their schedules were intertwined with royal duties, public appearances, and the constant scrutiny that came with their positions. Camilla appeared at breakfast, as she always did, perfectly composed and seemingly oblivious to the fact that her world was about to crumble. She greeted Charles with the same casual affection that had characterized their mornings for years, kissing his cheek and settling into her usual chair with the newspapers. Her ability to maintain this facade while knowing what she had been doing filled Charles with a cold disgust that surprised him with its intensity. "You seem tired, darling," Camilla observed, glancing up from the society pages. "Perhaps you should consider canceling some of your afternoon appointments. You've been pushing yourself too hard lately." The genuine concern in her voice made Charles wonder if she had become so skilled at deception that she could convince even herself of her sincerity. Charles managed a non-committal response, focusing on his breakfast while observing his wife with new eyes. Every gesture, every expression was now suspect. How long had she been perfecting this performance? When had their intimate conversations become nothing more than scripts in her elaborate deception? The woman sitting across from him seemed like a stranger wearing a familiar face. Their morning proceeded according to the usual routine. Camilla discussed her upcoming charity engagements, mentioned a dinner party they were expected to attend the following week, and shared gossip from her conversations with friends. Charles participated in this domestic theater while his mind raced with questions about which of these friends might have known about her affair. Who else had been laughing behind his back while he played the role of the devoted husband? The king's first opportunity to escape came with a scheduled meeting at Buckingham Palace regarding Commonwealth affairs. As his car pulled away from Clarence House, Charles felt a profound sense of relief at putting physical distance between himself and Camilla. The familiar streets of London passed by in a blur as he struggled to focus on the day's responsibilities, while his personal world lay in ruins. At the palace, Charles found himself grateful for the demanding schedule that required his complete attention. Discussions about trade agreements, diplomatic protocols, and constitutional matters provided a temporary refuge from the emotional turmoil that threatened to overwhelm him. His staff noted that he seemed particularly focused and engaged, unaware that their king was using work as an escape from a crisis that would soon reshape the monarchy itself. During a brief break between meetings, Charles retreated to his private office and found himself staring at a photograph on his desk. It showed him and Camilla at their wedding blessing ceremony, both looking genuinely happy and hopeful about their future together. The image now seemed like evidence from a crime scene, a record of the moment when he had been most completely deceived. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Prince William entered, his presence both welcome and complicated given the circumstances. Charles had always been protective of his sons when it came to palace drama, remembering too well how his own failed marriage had affected them. Now he faced the possibility of putting them through another royal scandal, another public dissection of their family's private pain. "Father, you wanted to discuss the upcoming tour of Australia?" William's voice carried the casual formality that characterized their working relationship. But Charles detected something else in his son's manner, a subtle tension that suggested William might have heard whispers about trouble in the king's marriage. As they discussed the logistics of the royal tour, Charles found himself studying his eldest son's face for signs of knowledge about Camilla's affair. William had always been perceptive about palace dynamics, and his position as heir to the throne made him privy to information that others might not receive. If he knew something, he was maintaining perfect diplomatic silence about it. The conversation gradually shifted from official business to more personal matters. William mentioned Catherine's latest charitable initiatives, spoke proudly about their children's achievements, and shared amusing anecdotes about family life. Charles listened with growing appreciation for the stability and genuine happiness that his son had found in his marriage, a stark contrast to the hollow performance that his own relationship had apparently become. "Catherine mentioned that she'd like to spend more time with you," William said casually. "She feels like you haven't had many opportunities to really talk since the coronation. Perhaps you could join us for a private dinner soon. Just family." The invitation struck Charles as both appealing and poignant. Catherine had always been warm and genuine in her interactions with him, offering the kind of uncomplicated family relationship that he now realized had been missing from his life. As their meeting concluded, Charles made a decision that surprised him with its clarity. He would not immediately expose Camilla's betrayal or demand explanations. Instead, he would begin the careful process of extricating himself from a marriage that had become a lie. This would require strategic planning, consideration of the constitutional implications, and preparation for the public storm that would inevitably follow. The remainder of the day passed in a series of official functions where Charles performed his royal duties with practiced efficiency, while his mind worked through the practical aspects of his situation. He would need to consult with legal advisors about the implications of a royal separation, speak with the Archbishop of Canterbury about the religious considerations, and prepare his family for another period of intense public scrutiny. That evening, Charles returned to Clarence's house to find Camilla hosting a small dinner party for friends. The sound of laughter from the dining room filled him with revulsion as he realized that some of these guests likely knew about her affair, while he had remained ignorant. The casual cruelty of being made a fool in his own home was almost unbearable. Rather than join the gathering, Charles retreated to his study and began making notes about the steps he would need to take in the coming weeks. His marriage to Camilla was effectively over, though the world didn't know it yet. The challenge now was managing the transition in a way that protected the monarchy, while allowing him to reclaim some measure of personal dignity. As the dinner party continued downstairs, Charles reflected on the irony of his situation. He had spent decades fighting to marry Camilla, convinced that she was essential to his happiness. Now he faced the prospect of fighting to free himself from a relationship that had become a source of humiliation and betrayal. The woman he had once seen as his salvation had become the architect of his most profound disappointment. 3 weeks had passed since Charles discovered the truth about Camilla's betrayal, and the strain of maintaining appearances was beginning to show. Palace staff noticed subtle changes in the king's behavior, his increased distance from the queen consort, and the way conversations seemed to die when she entered a room. Charles had become a master of cold politeness, fulfilling his public duties alongside Camilla, while privately beginning the complex process of disentangling their lives. The breakthrough moment came during a family gathering at Windsor Castle. William and Catherine had arranged an informal Sunday lunch, one of those rare occasions when the royal family could simply be themselves without the weight of public scrutiny. Charles had been looking forward to this respite from the performance his life had become, hoping that time with his grandchildren might provide some healing for his wounded heart. Camilla had initially planned to attend, but a carefully orchestrated migraine provided her with an excuse to remain at Clarence's house. Charles suspected she was using the time for another secret meeting with Andrew Parker Bowles, but he no longer cared enough to investigate. Her absence actually came as a relief, allowing him to engage authentically with his family for the first time in weeks. The afternoon unfolded with the easy rhythm of family life. Charles watched his grandchildren playing in the garden while William and Catherine moved around each other, with the comfortable efficiency of a couple genuinely in love. The contrast with his own marriage was painfully obvious but also illuminating. This was what a real partnership looked like. He realized, built on trust, mutual respect, and shared values rather than passion and compromise. As the children played, Charles found himself in conversation with Catherine about her recent visit to a women's shelter. Her genuine compassion and thoughtful approach to her charitable work impressed him, as it always did. Catherine had brought a fresh perspective to royal duties, combining traditional elements with modern sensibilities in ways that resonated with the public. "The women there have such incredible strength," Catherine was saying, her eyes bright with enthusiasm for her cause. "Many of them have rebuilt their entire lives after escaping impossible situations. It makes you realize how much courage it takes to start over, especially when you've invested so much in something that ultimately wasn't working." Her words struck Charles with unexpected force. Without meaning to, Catherine had articulated exactly what he was facing. The courage to start over, to admit that something he had fought for was fundamentally flawed, to rebuild after investing decades in a relationship that had proved to be built on shifting sand. "That must be terrifying," Charles replied thoughtfully, "leaving everything familiar, even when you know it's not good for you anymore." Catherine nodded, then seemed to really look at him, perhaps sensing something deeper in his comment than casual interest in her charity work. The moment was interrupted by Prince George calling for help with a kite that had become tangled in a tree. William went to assist, leaving Charles and Catherine alone on the terrace. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the gardens, and for a moment, the weight of royal responsibility seemed to lift, replaced by something approaching peace. "You seem different lately," Catherine said gently. "More thoughtful, perhaps. I hope everything is all right." Her concern was genuine, without the calculated quality that Charles had come to recognize in Camilla's expressions of interest in his well-being. Charles considered his response carefully. Catherine had always been discreet and trustworthy, but she was also William's wife and mother to the future heirs to the throne. Any confidences he shared with her would inevitably affect her relationship with her husband and her position within the family. "Sometimes life forces us to reevaluate our choices," he said finally, "to consider whether the things we've fought for are actually worth having." Catherine studied his face with the perceptive intelligence that had made her such an effective addition to the royal family. "My father once told me that the hardest decisions are often between what we want and what we need," she replied. "And sometimes what we thought we wanted turns out to be very different from what we actually received." There was wisdom in her words that came from her own journey from commoner to future queen, her understanding of sacrifice and adaptation. Their conversation was interrupted by the return of William and the children, but Charles felt a shift in his relationship with Catherine. She had seen something in him that others had missed, offered support without prying, and demonstrated the kind of emotional intelligence that he realized had been missing from his life with Camilla. As the afternoon progressed, Charles found himself paying closer attention to the dynamics between William and Catherine. They communicated with glances, supported each other's conversations, and shared responsibilities naturally. When one of the children had a minor accident, they worked together seamlessly to provide comfort and resolve the situation. It was a partnership in the truest sense, each making the other stronger. The contrast with his own marriage became increasingly stark. Charles realized that he and Camilla had never really functioned as partners. Their relationship had been built around passion, history, and ultimately his determination to overcome obstacles to be with her. But they had never developed the kind of mutual support and shared vision that he was witnessing between his son and daughter-in-law. As the day wound down and Charles prepared to return to Clarence House, Catherine approached him one more time. "I know this isn't my place," she said quietly, "but if you ever need someone to listen, someone outside the immediate situation, I want you to know that I care about your happiness. Not because you're the king, but because you're family." Her offer touched something deep in Charles's heart. Here was someone offering genuine support without agenda, someone who had proven her discretion and loyalty over years of service to the crown. For the first time since discovering Camilla's betrayal, Charles felt like he wasn't completely alone. Driving back to London, Charles reflected on the afternoon's revelations. Catherine had shown him what authentic partnership looked like, reminded him that starting over required courage but was sometimes necessary, and offered him the kind of uncomplicated family support that he desperately needed. More importantly, she had done all of this naturally, without seeming to realize the profound impact her presence was having on his perspective. That evening, as Camilla recounted her day of supposed recovery from her migraine, Charles listened with detachment. Her performance no longer affected him because he had been reminded of what genuine emotion looked like. The warmth and authenticity he had experienced with Catherine and William made Camilla's calculated responses seem hollow and transparent. For the first time since learning of his wife's betrayal, Charles began to envision a future beyond the immediate crisis. It would require difficult decisions, painful conversations, and probably public humiliation. But Catherine had reminded him that courage was sometimes necessary for survival, and that authentic relationships were worth pursuing, even when they required abandoning familiar but dysfunctional patterns. As he prepared for bed that night, Charles realized that Catherine had become more than just his daughter-in-law. She had emerged as a beacon of emotional honesty in a world that had become clouded with deception and performance. Her presence in his life represented the possibility of genuine connection, even as his marriage crumbled around him. The moment of truth arrived on a gray Tuesday morning in November, when Charles could no longer bear the weight of pretense. He had spent another sleepless night listening to Camilla fabricate stories about her day, each lie adding another layer to the wall of deception that had grown between them. As she prepared for what she claimed was a charity committee meeting, Charles made the decision that would change everything. "Camilla, we need to talk," he said quietly, his voice carrying a finality that made her freeze in the middle of applying her lipstick. She turned from her dressing table mirror, and for a moment, Charles saw something flicker across her face that might have been fear or recognition. "Of course, darling. After I returned from my meeting this afternoon?" Her response was perfectly calibrated, neither too eager nor dismissive, maintaining the performance that had become second nature to her. But Charles had learned to read the subtle signs of her deception. The way her hand moved to touch her necklace when she was nervous, the slight tightening around her eyes when she was calculating her next move. "No, Camilla. Now." Charles moved to his safe and retrieved the manila folder that had been burning a hole in his consciousness for weeks. The sound of the safe closing seemed to echo through the room like a death knell. "Because we both know you're not going to any charity meeting today." The transformation in Camilla's demeanor was immediate and telling. The carefully constructed mask of innocence slipped, replaced by the trapped expression of someone who had finally been cornered. She sank onto the edge of their bed, her hands folding in her lap with the resignation of someone who had always known this moment would eventually arrive. Charles opened the folder and began laying out the photographs methodically, each image a nail in the coffin of their marriage. Camilla's secret meetings with Andrew Parker Bowles spread across the surface like evidence in a courtroom, undeniable proof of betrayal that spoke louder than any words could. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of years of deception finally exposed. "How long?" Charles asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long has this been going on?" Camilla's composure cracked completely, and for the first time in their relationship he saw her without any protective facade. She looked older, smaller, diminished by the removal of her careful presentation. "It started again after the coronation," she admitted, her voice hollow. "Andrew reached out to congratulate me and we began talking. It wasn't meant to happen, Charles. It just developed." Her explanation sounded weak even to her own ears, the kind of justification that satisfied no one, least of all the man whose trust she had systematically destroyed. Charles felt a strange calm descend over him as the last of his illusions crumbled. "Meant to happen," he repeated slowly. "Nothing that has been going on for months just happens, Camilla. It was chosen, planned, executed with precision. You've been lying to my face while I defended you, supported you, stood by you against critics who said you were unworthy of the crown. The irony of the situation was not lost on either of them. Charles had spent decades fighting for the right to marry Camilla, weathering public disapproval and constitutional challenges. He had endured the breakdown of his marriage to Diana, accepted responsibility for his role in that failure, and worked tirelessly to rehabilitate both their reputations. Now he discovered that the woman he had sacrificed so much for had been making him a fool in the most fundamental way possible. "Do you love him?" The question came out before Charles could stop it, and he immediately regretted giving Camilla the power to hurt him further. But he needed to know, needed to understand if this betrayal was born of passion or simply convenience, whether she had chosen Andrew over him or simply chosen deception as a way of life. Camilla's silence was answer enough. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of admission. "I never stopped loving him, Charles. I tried to. I thought I could build something real with you, but—" She trailed off, unable or unwilling to complete the thought that would deliver the final blow to whatever remained of their relationship. Charles stood slowly, his movements careful and deliberate as he processed this ultimate betrayal. It wasn't just the affair that devastated him, but the realization that their entire marriage had been built on a foundation of self-deception. Camilla had married him not out of love, but out of ambition, status, or perhaps simply because she thought she should. The passionate relationship he had believed they shared had been largely a product of his own imagination and her skillful performance. "I want you out," he said quietly, the words falling between them like stones into still water. "Not immediately. We'll need to manage this carefully to protect the institution. But I want you to understand that our marriage is over. You are dead to me in every way that matters." The formality of his language reflected his retreat into the protection of royal protocol, the last defense against complete emotional devastation. Camilla began to protest, to offer explanations and justifications, but Charles cut her off with a gesture. "There's nothing you can say that will change this. You've made your choice repeatedly over months of deception. Now I'm making mine." His voice carried the authority of kingship, but also the finality of a man who had reached the end of his capacity for forgiveness. The practical implications of their separation would be enormous. Constitutional questions, public relations disasters, the impact on the monarchy's reputation, all of these concerns would need to be addressed. But in that moment, Charles felt only relief at finally acknowledging the truth that had been staring him in the face for weeks. As Camilla left the room, probably to call Andrew and inform him that their secret was out, Charles felt something like peace settle over him for the first time in months. The performance was over, the lies had been exposed, and the painful process of rebuilding could finally begin. His thoughts turned inevitably to Catherine, to the conversation they had shared at Windsor Castle about the courage required to start over. She had somehow known with her remarkable intuition that he was facing an impossible situation. Her offer of support now seemed like a lifeline, a connection to authenticity in a world that had become clouded with deception. Charles realized that his relationship with Catherine represented everything that his marriage to Camilla had lacked. Where Camilla had brought drama and complication, Catherine offered stability and wisdom. Where Camilla had demanded constant validation and attention, Catherine gave support without seeking anything in return. Most importantly, where Camilla had brought deception and betrayal, Catherine represented honesty and loyalty. The king understood that the coming months would test every aspect of his strength and judgment. He would need to manage a royal crisis while protecting his family from scandal, rebuild his personal life while maintaining his public duties, and somehow find a way forward that honored both his role as monarch and his needs as a man who had been profoundly betrayed. But for the first time since discovering Camilla's affair, Charles felt hope alongside the pain. Catherine's presence in his life, her demonstrated loyalty and emotional intelligence, suggested that authentic relationships were still possible. As he began the process of dismantling his marriage, he found himself looking forward to exploring what genuine partnership might look like with someone who had already proven herself worthy of trust. The weeks following Charles's confrontation with Camilla passed in a blur of careful orchestration and public performance. To the outside world, the king and queen consort continued their royal duties with practiced efficiency, attending state functions and charity events as if nothing had changed. But behind palace walls, a complex machinery of separation was already in motion, guided by constitutional lawyers, palace advisors, and the grim necessities of protecting the monarchy from scandal. Charles found himself relying increasingly on his family for emotional support during this devastating period. William had proven himself a steady presence, offering practical advice about managing the constitutional implications while never pressuring his father to discuss details he wasn't ready to share. But it was Catherine who emerged as his most crucial ally, providing the kind of understanding and wisdom that helped him navigate the treacherous waters of his collapsing marriage. Their conversations had evolved beyond polite family exchanges into something approaching genuine friendship. Catherine possessed an intuitive understanding of the pressures facing the royal family, combined with an outsider's perspective that allowed her to see situations with remarkable clarity. More importantly, she offered Charles something he realized had been missing from his life for years: unconditional emotional support without agenda or expectation. The moment that changed, everything between them occurred during a particularly difficult week in December. Camilla had been making increasingly desperate attempts to salvage their marriage, alternating between tearful apologies and veiled threats about the damage their separation would cause to the monarchy. Charles had reached his breaking point when Catherine suggested they take a walk through the gardens at Highgrove, away from the suffocating atmosphere of formal palace life. The winter afternoon was crisp and clear, with frost covering the carefully tended grounds that Charles had spent decades cultivating. As they walked along the familiar paths, Catherine listened without judgment as Charles finally gave voice to the full scope of his pain and disappointment. The affair itself was devastating, but the systematic deception, the months of lies, and the realization that their entire marriage had been built on false foundations had left him questioning everything he thought he knew about love and trust. "You're not responsible for her choices," Catherine said gently as they paused beside a fountain that had been silent for the winter. "You gave that marriage everything you had, fought for it against impossible odds, and honored your commitments even when it became difficult. Her betrayal reflects on her character, not yours." Her words carried a weight of conviction that penetrated the fog of self-doubt that had been plaguing Charles. Here was someone who understood both the personal cost of royal duty and the courage required to rebuild after devastating disappointment. Catherine's own journey from commoner to future queen had required enormous strength and adaptability, qualities that Charles was only beginning to fully appreciate. As they continued their walk, their conversation shifted from the wreckage of his marriage to broader questions about happiness, fulfillment, and the possibility of finding authentic connection despite the constraints of royal life. Catherine spoke thoughtfully about her own experiences, the challenges of maintaining genuine relationships under constant scrutiny, and the importance of surrounding oneself with people who offered honest support, rather than calculated advantage. "Sometimes, I think the hardest part about our position is, learning to trust our own judgment about people," she reflected. "Everyone has an agenda, everyone wants something, and it becomes difficult to distinguish between genuine affection and skilled performance." Charles realized that Catherine was articulating exactly what had happened with Camilla. His judgment had been clouded by his own desperate desire to believe in their love story. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Catherine asked about his plans for the future. "After everything is settled with Camilla, what do you envision for yourself? What would make you genuinely happy?" The question caught Charles off guard because he had been so focused on managing the immediate crisis that he hadn't allowed himself to consider what came next. "I think I'd like to find out what it feels like to be truly known by someone," he answered honestly. "Not as the king, not as a symbol or institution, but as a person with flaws and hopes and fears. I want to experience the kind of partnership you and William have, where two people make each other stronger rather than just enduring each other's presence." Catherine stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "You deserve that kind of happiness," she said with quiet intensity. "And I believe you'll find it, probably in ways you don't expect." There was something in her expression, a warmth and understanding that went beyond familial concern, that made Charles wonder if her support for his happiness was more personal than he had realized. Their walk was interrupted by the arrival of William and the children, who had come to Highgrove for an impromptu family visit. As Charles watched Catherine interact with her husband and children, he was struck again by the natural ease of their relationships, The way love and respect flowed between them without calculation or performance. This was what authentic family life looked like, he realized, and it made the hollow shell of his marriage to Camilla seem even more tragic by comparison. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner in the informal atmosphere of Highgrove's kitchen, Charles felt something approaching contentment for the first time in months. The conversation was easy and natural, ranging from the children's school activities to William's upcoming responsibilities to Catherine's latest charitable initiatives. For a few hours, Charles was able to forget about the constitutional crisis brewing in his personal life and simply enjoy being surrounded by people who cared about him without expecting anything in return. The moment that would later prove pivotal occurred as Catherine was helping clear the dinner dishes. She had been describing her visit to a hospice earlier that week, sharing insights about the resilience of patients facing terminal diagnoses and their families' capacity for finding meaning in the midst of loss. Her compassion and wisdom had moved everyone at the table, but Charles found himself particularly affected by her perspective on courage in the face of impossible circumstances. "You have remarkable insight into human nature," he told her quietly as they worked side by side in the kitchen. "Your ability to see the best in people, to find hope in difficult situations, it's exactly what someone in my position needs." Catherine smiled at the compliment, but seemed to understand that he was offering more than casual praise. "I think we all need people in our lives who believe in our capacity for happiness," she replied. "Sometimes we lose sight of our own worth when we've been hurt, and it helps to have someone remind us that we're worthy of love and respect." Her words seemed directed specifically at his situation, a gentle reminder that Camilla's betrayal didn't diminish his value as a person or his right to seek genuine happiness. As the evening wound down and William's family prepared to return to London, Charles found himself reluctant to see Catherine leave. Her presence had brought a lightness to Highgrove that had been missing for months, a sense of possibility that extended beyond the immediate crisis he was managing. When she hugged him goodbye, the embrace lasted a moment longer than protocol required, and Charles felt a connection that had nothing to do with royal duty or family obligation. Alone at Highgrove that night, Charles reflected on the remarkable transformation that Catherine had brought to his perspective. In the space of a few hours, she had helped him move from despair about his failed marriage to hope about his future possibilities. More importantly, she had shown him what genuine emotional support looked like, offering understanding without judgment and encouragement without agenda. As he sat in his study, surrounded by the books and personal treasures that made Highgrove feel like home, Charles began to understand that his feelings for Catherine had evolved beyond gratitude or familial affection. Her wisdom, compassion, and unwavering integrity had created a connection that challenged everything he thought he knew about appropriate relationships within the royal family. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Catherine was married to his son, the future king, and any romantic feelings he might harbor for her represented a potential catastrophe that could destroy his family and damage the monarchy beyond repair. Yet he couldn't deny the profound impact she had on his emotional well-being. The way her presence brought peace to his troubled mind and hope to his wounded heart. Charles understood that he was standing at a crossroads that would define the remainder of his reign and his life. He could continue down the path of duty and propriety, managing his separation from Camilla with dignity while maintaining appropriate distance from Catherine. Or he could acknowledge that life had presented him with an unexpected opportunity for genuine happiness, even if pursuing it required navigating uncharted and dangerous territory. The complexity of his situation was overwhelming, but one thing had become crystal clear during the evening at Highgrove. Catherine represented everything he had been searching for throughout his adult life: emotional intelligence, genuine warmth, unwavering loyalty, and the kind of authentic character that could not be performed or faked. The question now was whether he had the courage to explore these feelings, and whether Catherine might share the connection he felt growing between them. As he prepared for bed that night, Charles made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. He would find a way to spend more time with Catherine, to deepen their friendship and discover whether the emotional bond he felt was reciprocated. The path forward was uncertain and potentially treacherous, but for the first time since discovering Camilla's betrayal, Charles felt alive with possibility, rather than weighed down by disappointment. The king's last thought before sleep was of Catherine's smile, and the way her eyes had lit up when she spoke about finding meaning in difficult circumstances. If she could help hospice patients discover hope in their darkest hours, perhaps she could help a wounded king learn to believe in love again, even under the most impossible circumstances. The new year brought with it a sense of resolution that Charles had not experienced in months. The formal separation from Camilla had been announced to the public through carefully worded palace statements that emphasized mutual respect and commitment to their individual royal duties. The constitutional crisis that many had predicted failed to materialize, largely due to the skillful management of the transition and the public's growing acceptance that royal marriages, like all marriages, sometimes ended despite best intentions. Camilla had moved into a private residence in the countryside, maintaining her title but stepping back from most public engagements. The relief Charles felt at no longer having to perform the charade of their marriage was profound, like emerging from a suffocating room into fresh air. For the first time in years, he could be authentic in his personal life, free from the exhausting burden of pretending to be happy in a relationship built on deception. The most unexpected development of this period was the deepening of his relationship with Catherine. What had begun as family support during his crisis had evolved into something unprecedented in royal history, a profound emotional connection that transcended traditional boundaries while remaining, at least publicly, entirely appropriate. Their friendship had become the cornerstone of Charles's emotional recovery, providing him with the authentic partnership he had sought throughout his adult life. Catherine had navigated this delicate situation with remarkable wisdom, offering Charles the support he desperately needed, while maintaining her loyalty to William and her position within the family. She understood instinctively that Charles needed someone who could see him as a person, rather than a monarch, someone who could provide emotional honesty, without the complications of romantic expectation or political agenda. Their conversations had become more frequent and intimate, taking place during walks through various royal estates, quiet dinners at Highgrove, and long phone calls that stretched into the evening hours. Catherine possessed an unusual ability to draw out Charles's thoughts and feelings, creating a space where he could explore his emotions without fear of judgment or manipulation. The moment that crystallized their connection occurred during a private dinner at Clarence House in February. William was traveling on royal duties, and Catherine had accepted Charles's invitation to discuss her upcoming solo engagements, now that she was taking on additional responsibilities following Camilla's reduced role. The evening had the casual intimacy of a family gathering, but there was an undercurrent of something deeper that neither of them had explicitly acknowledged as they talked about her work with various charities and her vision for modernizing certain aspects of royal outreach. Charles found himself studying Catherine's face with growing admiration. Her intelligence was obvious, but it was her emotional wisdom that truly impressed him. She had an intuitive understanding of human nature that allowed her to connect with people from all walks of life, combined with a strategic mind that grasped the long-term implications of royal actions and decisions. "You would have made an extraordinary queen consort," Charles said suddenly, the words emerging before he could consider their implications. Catherine looked up from her notes, surprised by the unexpected compliment and its underlying suggestion that she would have been better suited to the role than Camilla had proven to be. "I hope I'll still have the opportunity to serve in that capacity someday," she replied carefully, referring to her future role when William became king. But there was something in her expression, a flicker of understanding, that suggested she grasped the deeper meaning behind Charles's observation. The conversation that followed was unlike anything they had shared before. Speaking quietly in the intimate atmosphere of Charles's private dining room, they began to explore the possibility that their connection might be more than familial support or friendship. Catherine acknowledged that her feelings for Charles had evolved beyond what was appropriate for a daughter-in-law, while Charles admitted that she had become essential to his emotional well-being in ways that went far beyond gratitude. "This is impossible," Catherine said softly, but without the conviction that would have ended the conversation. "I'm married to your son. I'm the mother of your grandchildren. The monarchy couldn't survive this kind of scandal." Her words were rational and correct, but her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as him. Charles reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that represented the crossing of a line they had been approaching for months. "I know the complications," he said quietly. "I understand the risks, the potential for disaster. But I also know that what we have is real in a way that my marriage to Camilla never was. The question is whether we're brave enough to explore where this connection might lead." Catherine didn't pull her hand away, and in that moment, both of them understood that they had moved beyond the realm of appropriate relationships into something unprecedented and dangerous. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility and consequence, the weight of a decision that could reshape the British monarchy or destroy it entirely. "I care about you," Catherine said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I should, more than is safe or smart or reasonable. But I also care about William, about our children, about the institution we all serve. I don't know how to reconcile those feelings." Her honesty was characteristic of the authenticity that had drawn Charles to her from the beginning. Charles squeezed her hand gently, understanding that they were both standing at the edge of a precipice that offered either fulfillment or devastation. "We don't have to decide everything tonight," he said. "But I needed you to know that you've become the most important person in my life, and that whatever happens next, you've already given me something I thought I'd lost forever, the belief that authentic love is possible." As the evening ended and Catherine prepared to leave, they embraced with the knowledge that their relationship had fundamentally changed. The careful boundaries they had maintained were gone, replaced by an acknowledgement of feelings that could no longer be ignored or denied. Whether they chose to pursue this connection or find a way to return to safer ground, they both understood that there was no going back to the innocent friendship that had sustained Charles through his separation from Camilla. In the weeks that followed, Charles and Catherine began the delicate process of exploring their feelings while maintaining the appearance of normal family relationships. Their situation was unprecedented in modern royal history, requiring them to navigate emotional territory for which there were no established protocols or precedents. The king had declared Camilla dead to him, but in reaching for Catherine's hand, he had discovered something he never expected: the possibility of genuine happiness with someone who truly understood both his public responsibilities and his private needs. The path forward remained uncertain and fraught with danger, but for the first time in his life, Charles felt he was in a relationship built on truth rather than compromise, offering hope that authentic love might indeed be possible, even under the most impossible circumstances.